Hey there. Alright, we're gonna do, I guess, a top 5 list. And this is top 5 reasons that you can tell that you're old. And here I'm not gonna go for any of the obvious stuff like gray hair, creaky knees, stuff like that. These are kind of less obvious things, I guess. So anyway, number 5. When your girlfriend likes someone that is old. And what I mean by this is one day you're hanging out with your girlfriend or whatever, and maybe they ask you who you think is hot, so you sort of say, in my case it'll be Selma Hayek, and then you ask the question in return, and they start admitting stuff like, oh, I like Sean Connery or George Clooney, and then you think to yourself, oh, well, these guys aren't particularly young. Well, in my case, it's that guy on the Travago commercials. So yeah, that's sort of my crying game, if you will. Okay, number 4. When the movies that you used to like as a kid aren't exactly how you remember them. And I've come across this not really by rewatching any movies lately, but just by looking at their trailers. So this happened twice recently. We were watching this one movie with Patrick Dempsey, that McDreamy guy, and then so it reminded me of how he used to be like a teenage actor, and then he made a movie called Run from 1991, and then he went away basically for about 10 years. He didn't really see him in anything. So anyway, I decided that I would show my girlfriend and her son the trailer of the movie Run, because like I really enjoyed that movie. I believe I seen it in a theater. And then we watch it together, and it's like the film is like poorly lit. The voiceover guy promoting the trailer sounded really archaic, and I don't know, it looked like it was a trailer from the mid-70s. Like it looked really strange and old. And then it happened again, like today as I record this, one of the movies out in theaters is Guardian of the Galaxy 2. And that reminded me of an old movie that I watched called Ice Pirates back in 84. And yeah, 84 was a while ago. And so we tried to watch that trailer too, and I really loved that movie when it came out. But you watch it now with all the bad special effects, and the same voiceover guy, I think, that did the Dempsey movie was doing this one too. But anyway, I can link these below, or maybe show them quickly right now in this video. Either way, check them out and you'll know what I mean. Okay, number 3. I don't know really how to summarize this nice and concisely while I'm recording this. But this is where, when you play a little arithmetic game, it reminds you just how old you are. So this happened to me about a week ago. I was on my smartphone on YouTube, and I had the urge to listen to Bryan Adams' This Time. I think it was probably his first hit from 1981. And then I realized 1981. And I work out the numbers in my head. I say, that's like 36 years ago. And then 36 years ago is, I don't know, sometimes I'm in denial, but that's a long time. And then just to reaffirm it, I said, if for anyone in 1981, if they were to subtract 36 years at that point, it would be 1945. And yeah, that's when I'm reminded of just how great a time period 36 years is. To me, 1981 does not seem too far off, but from 81 back to 45, that's like mind-blowing, I guess. Okay, number 2. You remember a time back when, of all the characters on Seinfeld, Kramer was always the most outdated in terms of his fashion. Okay, now let's skip ahead. If you watch Seinfeld now, you'll sort of see Kramer kind of wearing sometimes you'll see him wearing tweed, some earthy colors. He looks often sort of very fashionable, if not a little eccentric. And then you see Jerry and George. Sometimes they're wearing like these big Cosby sweaters, sort of these tight blue jeans type stuff. They look very dated, like they're stuck in the 90s, and I don't mean that in a terrible sense. And of course, to their defense, the whole series was shot in the 90s. So now let's reevaluate Kramer's fashion from a 1990s point of view, especially the early 90s when it came out. I'm old enough to remember that in the early 90s, you could not see brown on anyone's person. What I mean by that is if there was any clothing at all that was brown, it was because they shit their pants, or maybe perhaps their shoes or belt is brown. Brown was sort of like something that was done to death in the 70s. And a second ago I used sort of in a derogatory sense, stuck in the 90s. In the 90s, people would use the expression stuck in the 70s. And looking back, the 70s was a really cool decade. But I think by the time the 90s sort of rolled around, people weren't ready to appreciate it yet. And so yeah, I remember anytime I seen Kramer, he reminded me of two people. The way he dressed and his overall image kind of thing. The first person is Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor in the Doctor Who series, who was basically the Doctor from around 1974, maybe almost to 1980. And then the other person, not going to say what his profession is, you guys can look it up, but Jamie Gillis. Alright, number one, and I apologize here again, not very concise, but sometimes I'll talk to people and tell them how, I remember the world without the internet, but it goes beyond that. I remember a world before VCRs and microwave ovens. Now, the microwave oven I think was invented well before I was born, and I'm sure in some restaurants, hotels, stuff like that, they had them probably maybe since the 1960s. But the average person, when I was a small child, let's say 4, 5, and 6, they did not own microwaves. My own family, around 1983, 84, that's when we purchased our first microwave. And in terms of my extended family, like aunts, uncles, grandparents, I think my grandmother might have purchased hers the year before. Now, as far as VCRs go, it's more or less the same time frame. 83 is when we got our VCR. Now, I had been to people's houses that had VCRs, and I'll give examples of the kind of people prior to 1983 that would own a VCR. It would be a young guy, maybe between the age of 20 to 25, who's living on his own, has his own job. Maybe he's just living in a small bachelor pad. Let's say this is back in the 80s, so maybe his rent was a grand total of $150. So yeah, he had a lot of excess money, and he was sort of into technology and stuff like that. So yeah, that was probably your main demographic. And then the other person that I seen was, we were at this dentist or orthodontist's house. So of course, a household like that, they can get the toys a little bit early. And I don't know what was special about 83, 84. I have a funny feeling if we were to look up the prices of both items, VCRs and microwaves, they probably basically went from unattainable for most people to a special sweet spot where everyone was buying them. I think our first VCR, the one that we purchased in 83, I seem to remember my parents saying something that it was maybe $400 or $450. And I guess at the time that was the sweet spot for that.